Welcome, everyone. I'm Charles McClintock. I'm Director of the Institute for Social Innovation and Dean Emeritus here at Fielding. We have a very special session today to present with three presenters who have received a prestigious and important award from Fielding. And before we get into their presentations, I would like to introduce a person who needs no introduction, but I will introduce her anyway, our President, Katrina Rogers, and I will ask you, Dr. Rogers, to say a word about Dianne Kipnes and her general generosity to Fielding as a wonderful alum of the university.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome everyone to this session. It's good to see so many familiar faces, and I really appreciate how many of you are really committed to this learning over the week, because I've seen you in many other settings. This particular session highlights our research efforts at Fielding more generally, as well as specifically related to this award that focuses on social innovation. And I was thinking about this the other day, that only about 1% of the population in the United States has earned a doctoral degree. And I point this out only to remind ourselves that as researchers who are also dedicated to a type of scholarly practice, we exist in a rarefied atmosphere. But what makes scholarship at Fielding different, that is more applicable, kind of takes us out of that rarefication, that's more applicable to world problems, is that we also have a commitment to practice. And it is in this scholar practitioner model that often attracts people to Fielding and keeps you here as alumni to be invested in our learning community. And it's the element that Dianne Kipnes, who's a graduate of our clinical psychology program, sees as a very important part of Fielding that's quite distinctive, and it makes her a very strong advocate for Fielding generally. Dr. Kipnes couldn't be here today, but her commitment to creating a space for social innovation at Fielding is demonstrated by her long-term commitment to providing financial support for this work. And in addition, you may notice that our library is also named after Dr. Kipnes. She's supporting the library so that we can offer both more subscription services to students and also to expand as much as possible to our alumni. So who is Dianne? Dianne is a very unassuming person who in her private practice as a clinician is a practitioner of psychodynamics. She knew Anne Alonso well. Some of you may be familiar with her work. Dr. Alonso was a faculty member in our clinical psychology program. In her honor, after she passed, other faculty colleagues and her family created the Alonso Center for Psychodynamic Studies. And psychodynamics aims to get underneath what is motivating a person's interpretation of their world and subsequently their behavior. And by focusing on things like emotions, thoughts, early childhood formation, and our beliefs, our current ones, psychodynamics attempts to form a holistic perspective of a person's psychology. And the connection that Dr. Kipnes makes to social change more broadly is that in the same way, social innovation is nuanced work, complex work. It requires an understanding of deep perspectives of getting underneath. And in her worldview, she believes that this is built one research project at a time. So I'm very pleased to be here today to hear about the research of our three recipients of this award. And it's such an honor to be able to be here to hear you today. Kate McAlpine, Larry Gebhardt, and Carrie Arnold. And I think you'll see by their research both the depth and range of what social innovation can be. So I'm now going to turn this session back over to Dr. McClintock, who will be our moderator. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Katrina. Appreciate those remarks. And you will be hearing, Hillary will be announcing to the alumni community the application process for next year's award, or this coming year's award. And Dianne Kipnes has kept the criteria very general. She's interested in projects that demonstrate innovation, but also collaboration with others. And she's interested in projects that likely to have a broad impact on individuals, organizations, or communities. We will look for proposals that have a clear sense of activities and outcomes and timelines, and for ways of disseminating the results of the project. Anyway, all of that will be stated clearly. And for any of you who are on board for today's session, who want to apply for this award, and it's a financial award. It has grown each year as the endowment has matured. And so this year we will be awarding up to $10,000 for one or more than one application. So stay tuned for that announcement that will be coming out shortly. So we're going to begin. And we start with our most recent recipient, Kate McAlpine. Kate is a researcher, a change consultant, and a coach. You will see the infectious enthusiasm she brings to her work because it has a very strong moral purpose to it, ethical purpose to it. And Kate will talk to us about her organization, Citizens for Change, using the wisdom of the crowd to protect children in East Africa from violence. So Kate, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Before I start, I'd really like to again sort of re-emphasize my thanks to Diane for this opportunity. The endowment I received really provided catalytic funding for us to turn what was an idea into action. We are very much a seed sort of startup stage at the moment, and we're essentially running a applied experiment. So I'm going to talk to you today about Citizens for Change. And our work, we're really trying to apply the idea of the wisdom of the crowd, aggregating all the individual efforts across the region of East Africa, where people do behave pro-socially, and seeing what can that teach us more broadly about the power of community-based child protection. So I'm going to explain a little bit about the context, and then the sort of platform we use, and then what I've been up to more specifically from the research perspective. So really we understand violence against children as a collective action problem. And that is at the heart of what we are trying to resolve. And it is in advance of Sustainable Development Goal 16, building peaceful and inclusive societies for everybody. We focus particularly on peaceful and inclusive societies for young people, because the demographics of East Africa are that over 50% of the population are children. So the implications of high rates of violence. So when I talk about high rates of violence, in Tanzania, 75% of children have been victims of physical violence. 25% of girls were victims of sexual violence before the age of 15. So the costs are absolutely horrendous. And we really have what is almost a choice point as a region, that if we invest in young people, peak youth will really be of massive socioeconomic benefit to the region. But if we don't address violence, all the investments that we are making in other domains, education, healthcare, resource management, will essentially not reap a return. So the analysis says that violence and maltreatment is actually costing over $20 billion annually, partly because of the immediate problem of a child who's a victim, but the long-term implications affect well-being, functioning, productivity. Now, one of the things that we are trying to do is to use a social return on investment methodology to quantify what is the return on investment from individual citizen protectors who take action to protect children. And we're doing this because the argument to invest in child protection has never quite achieved any traction in the region. Over the last 20 years that I've been working in the field, the human rights agenda has sort of been pushed, hasn't really landed. The return from doing the right thing by children from a philanthropic perspective hasn't really landed with politicians. And so now we're really trying to make the economic argument, building off the work that's been done by the Lancet on the return on investing in early childhood, to say that there are a critical mass of people out there who are already protecting children. They're already taking pro-social action to protect kids. But because we don't know where they are and we can't track what they do, it's almost like the tree that falls in the forest and nobody hears it. Did it fall? So the narrative continues across the region of victimhood and passivity and problems. Whereas in fact, our underlying hypothesis is that there are people doing the right thing. It's just that we need to reveal that and to be able to make sense of the impact that they are making on people's lives. So the history of the whole child protection sector in the region has really been characterized by cognition, coordination, and cooperation problems. So there's a lot of sort of claimed values that we all think protecting children is the right thing to do. But the values in action really indicate otherwise. In Tanzania, for example, we have a president who recently said that pregnant schoolgirls will automatically be excluded from. They're sexually active children, and that is just morally wrong. So we have this dissonance between a lot of the civil society, faith-based citizen communities and the political narrative that goes on. So the problems take sort of three forms. It's how do you achieve high levels of cooperation amongst non-cooperative actors? And I would almost, but are actually often chasing the same sources of funding. Who is ultimately accountable for protecting children? When we have a government who says we will not interfere in the domestic domain, but we have children whose primary source of risk is often the families and authority figures in their lives, like teachers. And how do you protect the best interests of the children when we don't have a formal child protection system? So Citizens for Change is essentially 6,000 children by the end of 2023. We're in the stage where we're trying to develop proof of concept. And what we do is we identify a big, diverse, decentralized crowd of citizens who are protected to motivate children. And we do that really through two channels. One is household surveys. So door-to-door surveys where we ask people, do they self-identify as a child protector? And would they like to join a wider community? And people enroll in the system. The other is by working through partners who are working on the ground, either as civil society activists, local government, private sector, the church, and bringing the constituents that they engage with, inviting them to join Citizens for Change. Then what we do is we're trying to tap into the wisdom of the crowd. And this is the tech platform that we've developed that I'm going to tell you a bit more about. But essentially what we do is we use SMS technology to regularly survey these Citizens for Change about what are they doing to protect. And also use the technology to impart whatever information they want. So when people enroll, they'll say, you know, I'm interested in social norms or community-based protection or early childhood. And we have packages of SMS-based information that then goes out to them with these content areas. We also then run a series of virtual, what we call Community Connect. They used to be under a tree. We're not COVID days, we're now doing them online. So we have people who, they may be in the bush, but they will be on Zoom to actually join in these meetings where we discuss the dilemmas that people are facing. And then we work with the information lab essentially to aggregate all that data and say, what is the crowd telling us? And really what we're trying to demonstrate to government and development partners and child protection practitioners is that people are out there doing the right thing. They may not always act in the best interests of children, but the will is there. And there's this opportunity to build people's toolbox. So we're really intervening, building a crowd, deploying our system, and building an evidence base of beliefs and actions of child protectors, working to develop protective norms. There's a big narrative that goes on in East Africa that the norm is violence against children. And the statistics almost reinforce that. But we're really trying to create a counter narrative and to evidence base that. So we have to assume 4 things essentially. One, that a latent crowd of child protectors exists. And this year has been really about testing that assumption. Our goal is to get 19,000 people on the system in this first year, and we're already at 12,000. The second is that we can get a transformative experience via digital engagement. This is proving harder from a design perspective to do. The third is that we can tap into their wisdom using data analytics. And the fourth is that the crowd wisdom can influence government, international donors, the whole funding ecosystem. And what David Blake Willis likes to say is that we're working on decolonizing the child protection narrative in East Africa. So the tech platform is really what I've spent this year and Diane's lovely grant helping to develop. And it really is a platform combining a number of interfaces, a database, a relationship with a telecoms broker in East Africa, Tableau, which is a data analytics thing, and various little apps in between each of those that enables us to listen to, talk with, and learn from people who behave pro-socially, that's who we're targeting, and who live on the digital margins. And it enables us to use SMS messaging to design and deliver a range of surveys and educational messages, but also then to aggregate the responses and to provide real-time. The goal is 500,000 children by the end of 2026 and evidence that protective norms spread. What we're currently doing at the moment is creating a social return on investment forecast to be able to forecast how much social value will we create, because we really think that that's going to be critical about evidencing the impact that we're achieving. So the research perspective, I mean, I'm sort of a scholar practitioner and identify more research lens these days, but we're really looking at building an evidence base about the beliefs and actions of child protectors, demonstrating social value and demonstrating what works to prevent and respond to violence in the East African context. There's lots of studies here that are often very NGO oriented, so a lot of reports that end up on shelves and don't actually inform practice, funding, or government policy. And we're really hoping that the government will be able to use this data to track its progress in its own national plan to address violence against women and children. So what did I do last year? We have a working tech prototype. Over 12,000 citizens for change have been recruited, and we've designed all the SMS packages, and we have equivalent educational infographics, and we're busy deploying those. We're working in Uganda as a prototype and working with an organization that does family strengthening and tries to avoid child separation. And so we've been working with 500 of their community volunteers and have managed to go through the whole sequence of recruiting volunteers, designing the surveys, getting responses, and having the analytic dashboard. And we've got some really exciting partnerships that have been formed. So I'm currently designing a study with Porticus Foundation, which will be using the platform to understand the prevalence and drivers of violence in faith-based schools in Tanzania to inform their child protection investments. We also have another just over 2-year action research project that we're developing with Women Fund Tanzania. They're a feminist movement, and we'll be looking in one rural district into a deep dive, looking at how people are resolving the collective action problem of violence against women and children in that district. We have a partner with the Child Helpline, so we are now digitizing their whole database of public servants, social workers and police, so that actually the people who are responsible for taking action from the authorities' end is in the public domain. And we're just working with the Catholic Archdiocese, who have 3.5 million congregants, to use the platform to popularize their child protection commitments. So lots of exciting work's been done. And I did do some writing. So I have, you can click on all these links, hopefully when you get the presentation, but our strategy has spent most of my time. I presented at the Social Values Matters conference earlier this year, and have just become an accredited practitioner in that. So we're really running with that methodology. I've also got a publishing relationship with Apolitical, which is a platform for public servants across the globe, and have been doing a few sort of, op-eds there. And then did a big piece earlier this year on looking at the preconditions for inclusive development in Tanzania, which was then published by Tanzanian Affairs. I've been asked to present at the Classic Grounded Theory conference later this year, and I've just submitted a piece to Third World Thematics to look at the ethical and methodological issues, particularly that arise when working with children in this space. So always busy. Really what we're doing is testing a lot of tools at the moment. So we're going to do a forecast this year. We've been using a Sprocklin narrative inquiry methodology to try and get away from our reliance on face-to-face dialogue, which was really our sort of our wheelhouse. And can we use narrative in a way that can be done virtually? Which is going to be a game changer for Tanzania, and there's interest in now doing that in Uganda. And I'm doing a lot of IRBs for fielding at the moment, which is really taking up most of my time. The big priority is to develop a sort of KPI tracking dashboard to really track the size of the crowd, the nature of the engagement, and the outcomes for children who are being protected. And we are also digitizing a lot of the work that's been done in Australia on protective behaviors. So I've got my plate full, and I'm just thrilled to be part of this and to have such a substantive relationship with fielding. Fielding was transformative for me. So thank you.
Kate, thank you so much. You exemplify the purposes of the Kipnes Award: innovation, collaboration, and broad impact. And so I just want to thank you again for submitting a proposal for this amazing work that you're doing. And
Thank you.
I hope at all of those places you're presenting, you make sure you say ISI Fellow at Fielding Graduate University. We want to be identified with you and your work for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.
And so I will, not ISI Fellow, Kipnes Fellow, excuse me. But anyway, you are an ISI Fellow also.
I am, yes.
So let's have 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of questions and comments on Kate's work.
This is Larry. And Kate, this is a fantastic project that you're doing. I've been involved with Rotary International for many years, and your project overlaps, several of the Rotary focus areas. And do you have contact with Rotary people there in East Africa?
You will laugh, but I was the first female Rotarian in Tanzania.
Okay, well,
back in the day, yes.
Okay, well that's a real source of collaboration and funding and so on. I've organized several international projects with Rotary, so I'll be in touch with you separately by email to see in any other ways that that I can help your venture. I also lead a refugee. I lead a refugee support organization here in Idaho, and many of our refugees, as they come here and become Americans, they want to reach back to their home country and help.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Larry. Any other comments or questions for Kate? Well, again, I'm just so impressed with the innovativeness of what you're doing, the power of the crowd. I really resonated with your comment about the NGO focus of a lot of these efforts and reports that gather dust on the shelves, and the difference between that strategy and the one that you're employing, which is so action oriented. And anyway, just terrific.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, keeps me busy.
Yes, well,
and happy.
Good. I can tell, we can tell that. By the way, I didn't ask you where you're broadcasting from.
I'm in Tanzania at the moment.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for staying up late and
no, it's a pleasure
doing this. Okay, well, we're going to move on to our next presenter, who you just heard from, Larry Gebhardt. Larry has the sort of average standard background of all fielding students. He was a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine captain. He's got a master's degree in adult education. He developed and worked in a commercial shipyard in Rhode Island. And he continues his consulting work as an adjunct faculty at Idaho State University and is a leader and board member for several nonprofit organizations. I'm being facetious. Larry's career is about as diverse as one could imagine. And we're proud to have him as a graduate of fielding. And President Rogers mentioned that he gave a presentation back in the day when we had face-to-face events in our summer session presentation. It was quite wonderful. And Larry's project has been going on for a little over a year, I guess, but he's had to make modifications in his plans due to COVID, like everybody has. And he's going to tell us what he's been up to. And Larry, the floor is yours. And unmute yourself.
Okay.
Great, we can hear you.
So I'm broadcasting from Pocatello, Idaho, and send greetings. My presentation today is about a scholar practitioner social change project. The goal is to help disadvantaged people here in Pocatello move from being tax or charity absorbers to becoming taxpayers and community contributors. If time permits, I've got a few last slides and comments that would address some ways that I've used my fielding education over the past 20 years and into my senior citizen status. A bit of background, Charles commented on this, but I began my fielding adventure in 1994. Following a 26-year Navy nuclear submarine career. And I was beginning startup of a commercial shipyard in Rhode Island. And that shipyard is operating still after 25 years. We moved back to Pocatello to be closer to aging parents. And from Pocatello, I commuted to Rhode Island for shipyard work. And then I was invited to join a team to expand and improve a shipyard in Ketchikan, Alaska. I've retired from corporate work and now just do consulting work in applied research. This is Pocatello. It's a high mountain valley north from Salt Lake City and south of a Native American reservation. It's a community becoming more diverse in a very conservative state. Here, I've served as adjunct faculty at Idaho State University and led several nonprofit organizations like Rotary, a church, group camp, a refugee support organization, and I'm working on an applied research project aimed at sustaining Idaho's rural counties. In 2016, I was appointed to the State Use Council to monitor oversight of 11 nonprofits that provide sheltered and supported employment for disabled people. These businesses operate under the Idaho state use law that's been on the books since 1973. The law gives preference for government purchased products and services produced by disabled and disadvantaged people hired by the nonprofits. In practice, only physically and mentally disabled are clients of these 11 organizations. In this type of setting, disadvantaged persons could gain job skills and confidence to become self-sufficient. Who are disadvantaged in Pocatello? Here are some. In Idaho, some disadvantage results from discrimination or bias. School dropouts, non-Christian religions, veterans with fewer job skills or PTSD, Native Americans, legal violators, LGBTQ community, people recovering from addictions, people recovering from domestic violence or depression. Without opportunity to work, many become tax or charity absorbers. So why a disadvantage project? Idaho has defined mental and physical disability. There's no legal definition for disadvantage despite its term in the Idaho state use law. Idaho provides vocational rehab for disabled, but not for disadvantaged. Conservative attitudes in Idaho are biased by 20% of disadvantaged people who become tax absorbers. They're the lazy and free riders in society. The bias blocks the 80% of motivated disadvantaged from job opportunities. I'm grateful to have received the 2019 Kipnes Award for a project that with the Institute for Social Innovation. And in a year's time, I hope to define disadvantage with an unemployment or with an employment connection and get pointers to tools and methods to reduce disadvantage. Collaboration was achieved with Idaho State University faculty and students, local businesses, and city and state legislators. We studied disadvantaged literature, gathered statistics and case studies, and a database of employer experience, and then when the COVID situation came along, that blocked a lot of our face-to-face research work, and until it's sort of expanding again this year. We discovered no community or state definitions for disadvantage that would fit a common model. Most organizations that serve disadvantaged have specific definitions for specific populations, such as veterans, addiction, or less literate. Most employing business leaders are sympathetic to disadvantaged people if they can show attitude and aptitude for work. Nonprofits and government agencies working with disabled express doubt about funding and staff to expand their client base if disadvantaged were included. State legislators were unwilling to champion a cause that could expand government in this conservative state. What we did find in common is that the additive model that's drawn from poverty literature fit disadvantaged people. In this model, 80% of persons in poverty or disadvantage figure out how to survive, so their resource glass for their living in disadvantage is functionally full. When disadvantaged people seek work or return to school, their resources fall short, so they need additives like health, literacy, mentoring, financial support, and others. The most common additive identified in our work is help overcoming mental health challenges. Employing business leaders identify these types of mental health challenges as roadblocks for disadvantaged people seeking employment or job upgrades. These findings were validated in Idaho's statewide studies by the National Education Technology Assessment and by the Idaho Business for Education organization during these months of Kipnes applied research. The opportunity to expand and extend Kipnes research, applied research, came in the form of a new book by one of my Pocatello Centennial Rotary Club colleagues, Heather Murray, a master teacher. The book, Think, Get a Grip, is simplified cognitive behavioral therapy for understanding with applications and exercises aimed at younger, current, and prospective employees. Rotary District 5400 and our local club added $2,000 to the applied research budget. The Kipnes Rotary Project developed a workbook designed to match the Get a Grip book in 13 lessons. The project developed a set of lesson plans, guiding a facilitator to work with a younger colleague over a 6-week period. The book, workbook, and lesson plans were reviewed by a licensed professional counselor and a doctor of clinical psychology. Content of these sessions lead participants to overcome obstacles to get a grip on life. This process can help people avoid disadvantage and move out of disadvantage in terms of employment. After start, the sessions explore recognizing your own internal voice and learning if the voice is true or not. Other sessions explore effects of negativity, limiting beliefs, judgment, self-worth, and habits. Participation of business and organization leaders in Get a Grip sessions validate that the book and the project addresses mental health challenges caused by thoughts, feelings, and actions that often affect workers on the job. Gaining skills to perform self-directed cognitive behavioral therapy can help move a person into promise and potential in life. Expansion of participants moved from Rotary Club leaders and Idaho State University faculty into broader university programs, liaison with our Chamber of Commerce to reach more businesses, and liaison with the local school district to incorporate these concepts into primarily the high school area, and to broader contexts introduced by networking and Zoom meetings. So there's pieces of this that are sort of moving nationally. The Kipnes project was aimed at helping disadvantaged tax and charity absorbers move into taxpayer and community contributor capability. We will continue the Get a Grip program evaluation until early May. We'll revisit the Idaho State Use Law to explore a better interpretation of disadvantaged in the legislative language. We'll coordinate with our growing group of allies who are concerned about disadvantaged people and about mental health challenges. A final report for ISI and Rotary will be produced by the end of May this year. After our project research, my hypothesis now is resource additives can help 80% of disadvantaged people to be taxpayers and community contributors. So I invite questions and discussion. If any time remains, I can share some other ways I've applied fielding education to practice in my business and in the community.
Thank you very much, Larry. I forgot to mention as I was introducing you that I saw, I believe it was Kate who mentioned a return on investment concept in terms of her work. And I know that that's a concept that's related to your work as well. So just an interesting connection between the two of you. Any comments or questions for Larry?
Now that return on investment concept is really important, I think, in our social change work. And here in Idaho, which is, probably one of the reddest of the red states, that we need to make an argument for the population and for business, that what we're doing in social change and social justice projects has benefit. And this argument, sort of a bumper sticker name, helping people go from tax absorbers to taxpayers, that's become making this project a little bit more acceptable in the public and political eye.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you noticed any change in the, well, I mean, it's been such a politically intense year where people have polarized a lot. How has that, I gather that's survived, that you weathered that storm in a way with that concept.
Right. And, you know, if we, you know, I'm sort of motivated by, years ago, my wife and I took on a little family motto, which was bloom where you are planted. And coming back to Pocatello is our 19th move. We've been married 55 years now. And so we work on the local level. Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the House, said all politics is local. So I've put much more, and my wife has, working with me, or we team up on a lot of these issues in the community. We really concentrate on the local community. And I think, you know, over the years we've been here, there is a difference. I mean, just this project, in part, helped lead to designing a welcoming resolution for our community. And, you know, it took a year to build support of the city council to pass such a resolution, because it had pointers in it to some of these people who are disadvantaged, actually. But that passed unanimously back in November, and the attitudes of accepting some of these people, like the refugees and international students and the Native Americans and others, there's more acceptance now.
Well, that's good to hear. I don't suppose you have any, I mean, I would imagine somebody in the Biden administration would be quite inspired by what you're doing at the local level, especially in a red state. I don't know if you have any connections, and I certainly.
Well, we've invited our congressional delegation to engage in this, and some of the staff are quite supportive of these ideas. That notion of moving tax absorbers into taxpayers gains traction with our Republican government in the state, and then in the delegation. And we'll work harder on that as this time goes on. We'll end this ISI project and Rotary project in May. I mean, we need to sort of cut that off, but the concepts will continue, and we have a growing group of people at the university and in the community that want continuity and expansion.
Great. We got a couple questions in the chat. I can read them, or you can ask yourselves if anybody would like to speak up.
I'm going to go off the screen share.
Okay.
And then I can see the chat.
Okay. Towards the bottom.
Yeah, I see the one about socialvalue.org. I don't know that. I'll take a look. And as far as the individual clients, I mean, we're working with the leaders of organizations in the community. And one of the programs that started up at Idaho State University, it is aimed, it was grant funded by the Albertson Foundation here, and it's to provide more job-oriented literacy to older workers who've lost their jobs because of, technology changes and so on. So that's been very impactful, and we're working with their organization to gather some of these disadvantaged individual stories and how they've come out of disadvantaged. I mean, just like we know when we're working with human people, we've got to be cautious about privacy and safety using IRB standards. And the whole Kipnes project went through the Idaho State University Institutional Review Board review before we got started.
Right. Great. Thank you. Other questions or comments for Larry? You said you had, you wanted to potentially add a few comments about fielding.
I can, and I can just probably talk through these, but I'm going to go back to the screen share if I
All right.
can. We'll see if that works.
Should work. There you go.
We've talked about fielding as a scholar, practitioner, organization, and one of the things that I have found in telling people about fielding and about scholar practitioner work has been a bit of an antidote to the anti-scholar attitudes that exist in America. There's an anti-science and anti-humanities feeling, particularly here in Idaho, anti-diversity. So to use these concepts and then have some graphics to talk about this at church and in Rotary, in my informal meetings with business leaders and so on, it's an important thing. So, and I think that's my recommendation then, is to come up with a little bit of a pitch to sell the scholar practitioner model. We're not staying in our ivory tower. We're out getting things done.
Right.
Another one that just sort of internal to me, but really was enhanced by fielding education, was systems thinking. And so to have this toolbox of systems thinking tools and be able to look at your community from a high level, a 50,000 foot level at the big picture, then zoom in to a lower level where we look at sort of relationships and interconnection, communications channels, and collaboration mechanisms and so on. And then we can move all the way down to the ground level. So like in Rotary, if we're working on a water project, we can look at, the technology of what we're going to do. So I encourage all of us as we apply our fielding education is to think in systems. Then, from the early days of fielding KAs is the notion of participatory action research and hermeneutic spiral, where you think about basic or scientific research that creates new knowledge, but then applied research, which is what I fancy myself doing more, is to use the scientific knowledge and new knowledge to solve problems. At my core, I'm an engineer, and that's what engineers do. I think is solve problems and build things. But having this sort of scholar model and this notion that you try things, develop a hypothesis, test it, try some things, step back, go back in. Those are all important fielding attributes that I've applied, and then I've used this kind of knowledge to teach these principles in my Rotary Club and in my church and in other ways. Will McQuinney was a mentor for me. So his work on metaphor and model were really important. And one of the early applications of this is when we were starting the Rhode Island shipyard. The shipyard is a complex place. I mean, it's got, the physical things, the business side, the community things, environmental, all that. And, how do you tell that story? And so there was a retired teacher who'd grown up in the South, and in her Southern accent one day in a community meeting, she looked at what we were doing and began to get the big picture. And she stood up and lifted up her arms, and she said, "From this tiny acorn, a mighty oak will grow." And that became our metaphor and model for the company, because we could think about, the roots and the trunk and the branches and all of this and make things go. So I encourage Will McQuinney, has written some great books, and his legacy at fielding is another one to carry with us. And another one, just a little construct, and we've got, all of us have these types of constructs in our back pocket. But for me, this Johari window, the main idea is to focus, for me, is to focus on the unknowns. When we're working on a community projects or whatever, it's what we don't know to ourselves and what others don't know. That's where we need to dig in and do our research work. And to have a little model to tell about this it is another fielding thing. So I'll turn off the screen share.
All right.
And be quiet now.
Well, no, that's great. Are those part of your PowerPoint?
Yes, they are.
Oh, good. Well, I truly thank you for making the connection between your education at Fielding and how you apply that in your work and in your world. That's very helpful. All right, barring no more comments or questions for Larry. Thank you again very much. We're proud to have you as an awardee, a Kipnes awardee and an ISI fellow. And it sounds like you've adapted to the world of COVID to a certain degree and are making great progress on the project. So we look forward to a report in May. All right, we're going to switch to our last presenter. And by the way, I wanted to just say, and I'll probably say it again at the end of the session, that on the Fielding alumni site, Hillary has posted the announcement about this year's Kipnes applications. And so you'll see the criteria and how to apply if you go to the alumni site. Well, our very first Kipnes award was given to Carrie Arnold. Carrie is an author of a book, Silenced and Sidelined: How Women Leaders Find Their Voices and Break Barriers. And she's had over a decade of leadership coaching experience and now gets to practice what she has preached or coached about leadership, because she is the director for our Fielding's evidence-based coaching program, which she began that position last June. Carrie is going to speak about women in leadership without voice, the journey from research to publication.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's also just delightful to hear my colleagues talk about their research. So I'm learning a lot. I'll start my presentation here. You know, one of the things that I was given advice probably about 15 years ago that I didn't actually start using until maybe 12 years ago. And the advice was, say yes to everything. You know, often we're told to have boundaries, and we're told to, you know, make sure that, you know, we have an appropriate way that we say yes and no. And when I was told to say yes to everything, that really came into play when I started my journey at Fielding. I began as a student when I was 30 years old at Fielding, and I got my first master's degree. And that was a game changer for me. And I went off to another school to become a coach, but I came back to Fielding to do my PhD work. And I did my dissertation in 2016, and I wanted to study voice. I wanted to study leadership linguistics. I wanted to understand what makes a person follow, what makes a person lead, and I wanted to do it through rhetoric. And what I realized as I began my studies working with the amazing faculty at Fielding, that I was maybe studying the wrong thing, that in order to really understand leadership voice, I might first need to take a look at what gets in the way of leadership voice. And so since I am one, I decided to study women, and I did a interpretive phenomenological analysis. I also used an instrument, so it was loosely a mixed method study. And, you know, started small, as we all do in a dissertation, studied a little over 20 women. I had, you know, my IRB approved study. I found the essence of the silencing experience. And from my study of my dissertation, I was able to create a typology of what I thought women were experiencing. And right before I defended, and this is where the yes starts to come into play, I was asked by some fellow coaches to start sharing my research. And so I said yes. And I started sharing it to groups of coaches. And what ended up happening was after I defended my dissertation, I realized I had only answered parts of the question, and I had only found glimpses of the real essence of what we experience as human beings when we're in leadership roles, but then experience this phenomenon of feeling silenced. And so what I realized was that people were saying, but what about this? And what about that? And how is this an element? And I couldn't answer all those questions. And so when I was asked, maybe you should do more study, I said yes, and came back to Fielding and applied to be a fellow with the Institute for Social Innovation. And that resulted in me reopening my IRB application and going back into the data and collecting more and interviewing more and verifying what I found the first time and going deeper into organizations where women are almost absent: science, technology, engineering, math, and also looking at women lawyers and women of color. I had that in my first study, but I didn't have enough. And so what Fielding has done is, I think, just really shepherded me through the process. And then in 2018, I was awarded the first inaugural Dianne Kipnes Fund. And what I was grateful for was that provided me voice. I'm studying voice of women, but getting the award just helped me understand that there's more to this than just me trying to understand something to help a few. I really wanted to understand the silenced to help a lot because I wanted to change the conversation. With those funds, I was able to really focus on research, which is difficult to do when you are a practitioner, especially when you're finished with your PhD. And with that support, I was able to collect enough data that resulted in the book, Silenced and Sidelined. And I had the book basically written parallel to finding an agent and a publisher, and then COVID hit, and we were a little delayed in getting it released, but it came out last summer. And then throughout this process, one presentation sort of led to another presentation and et cetera. And I actually went back and counted because I knew I was going to be doing this presentation. And I've had 24 speaking engagements since I began defending my dissertation in 2016. And a lot of the audience has been coaches. And I appreciate that because coaches are often the witness to the client silencing. And they're often the one that gets hired to help a client rediscover their voice. And so I've very much appreciated the support in the coaching community. But there's also been opportunity to speak directly to leaders and practitioners in certain areas in industry. I've spoken with the Treasury Institute at the federal level. I have spoken to women in conservation. I've done a lot of seminars with women lawyers and women in technology. Next week, I'm going to be delivering a presentation to a group of women in Maine who heard about the research. And what I appreciate about the speaking engagements is it's about the research and it's about the topic and it's changing the conversation. And I'm thankful for that. And I'll skip this slide. I'll come back to it here. When I took the role here at Fielding, it was an opportunity for me to maybe shepherd younger coaches into understanding the importance of having a valuable voice. And so I definitely appreciate the support. But I also just love being a coach and grooming others to be a coach. But there's something that's happening, and I'm still kind of curious about it. And I've put a lot of pressure at times on my colleagues who've left leadership. Because that's often the cycle that we see, is that we see leaders be successful, maybe hit a certain point in their career where their success is maybe measured differently. And then they get interested in coaching and consulting, and then they leave industry. And then they're helping industry from the side. But then that continues to create a gap in who's leading organizations and what kind of voice are they fostering within organizations. and really encouraging coaches that maybe coaching and consulting is not the end game, but coaching and consulting is a step in the process to maybe come back. Because what we're noticing is even more so today, a significance around what it really means to live and work in a silenced state. I think the last 4 years have definitely shown more light on this. But even before the political unrest, the statistics of women in leadership, there's so many different reasons why there's so few numbers. But what's interesting is there's not few numbers in middle management. There's not few numbers in education. Women are the most educated. Women get more master's degrees. They get more degrees in law. In medical school, it's 50-50. Women get more doctoral degrees. We get more bachelor's degrees than men. And these statistics have actually been true since 1980s. So this isn't like this new phenomenon. We are holding 50% of middle management positions. And then statistics change. We're no longer the primary statistic. We are dropping to be less than 11% when it comes to running organizations, having a chair around the boardroom, holding a corner office. And, you know, when you look at the statistics of women in executive roles, our trend is not consistently going up. It kind of oscillates a little bit. And as women leave those executive roles, they're not always replaced by women. And so we're seeing a little bit of a shift in Congress. We're seeing a little bit of shift when I see that we finally have a female vice president. We're seeing these milestone events, and it's amazing. However, the trend is not strong enough for us as scholars and practitioners to say we've arrived, we've made it, we're now on equal footing. So given how small our numbers are, when we are there, when we are at the table, when we are at the boardroom, when we are running the companies, we have to have a purposeful voice. We have to have a voice that carries. And that's not always true. So the women in my study were women who were over the age of 50. Traditionally, that was sort of the majority. These were women in senior level roles, running organizations, running large bodies of work. And they were telling me their stories about feeling silenced, which is such a paradox given how voice is integrated into leadership. And I won't get into all the different reasons and how, you know, women are silenced, but I will say one thing around self-silencing. And I have 2 quotes here. If you don't speak it out one day, it will just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside. And the reason I have this quote in here is that there are ways in which our voices can be heard, and there are ways in which we speak and they cannot be heard. And I think as women, we've got to get very clear on our rhetoric and our spoken word, our dominant discourse, and if it is aligned or not aligned within the places we're trying to lead. There's a lot of work on systemic change. But as women, we also have to look at systemically, how are we speaking and how are we supporting each other? And then Glenn, who actually sat on my dissertation along with Dr. Rogers and Dr. Miguel Gebhardt, who were amazing and supportive. But Glenn wrote a book on language, and she talks about the relationship of language and silence to deprivation and how profound it is. And what happens when one needs to or should speak and is cut off from the possibility of speaking. What kind of deprivations does the silenced body experience? And that is not actually just a rhetorical question. We know the answer to some of this, and she's done work around it. My research shed light on some of it as well, that there is a physical deprivation. But there's also a social deprivation, and I'll talk about the social piece of it first. And I think we've seen evidence of this again over the last 4 years, but long before, around there's a difference between silence, you know, all the different meanings of silence, and then there's the silenced. And I would argue both can cost lives, both can get in the way of the social change that we're all eager to create. But when we are living and leading with a silenced voice, the world is not getting our best selves, especially when there's so much that we need to be saying and doing to bring about social justice and change. And when I researched the individuals in my study and looked at their stories and their data, some of them are opting out of leadership because the cost is too high. And when the cost is too high, we always coach people that if the cost is too high, at what risk to you are you doing this work? We always encourage people to take care of self. But sometimes the cost to leave is greater. And so what does it mean to stay in these conversations and be in a collective group of people whose voices can be heard? But when we feel silenced, it gets in the way. And I'll show this visual because long before COVID entered into the picture, I had created this metaphor of what it's like to feel silenced. There's a loss of agency, a deficit thinking, cognitive spin. Women talked about post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma, negative vulnerability, isolation, loss. And then there was a physical impact in their bodies that typically resided in the neck and throat area, the gut area. And then they talked about full body stress that often manifested in weight gain, weight loss, migraines, just a stress that the body carried. And yet we're asking women to lead. And we're asking them to lead with full voice. But if they're experiencing this phenomenologically, it's very difficult for them to stay in. And so what I talk about in the book are ways to support ourselves, ways to support each other. There's an invitation for men. Men are not the villain in the story. And every time I speak, I'm so grateful when men are in the audience, because women silencing other women can actually cause greater pain than maybe people realize, maybe even more so than what we might experience from our male colleagues. And so in the book, I talk about ways to recover. And all the ways I talk about were lifted from the stories I heard of women, of what worked and what didn't work. And there were so many executive women who talked about how their world shifted when a male colleague took a greater interest in being a male champion and amplified their voices. Not rescue. How important it is that we support each other. How women.
You're cutting out, Carrie. I don't know if you can hear me.
I think I got lost and now I'm back. I can't remember. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we lost about 30 seconds of you.
Okay. That's so weird. I think it must just be an internet. Well, I'm almost to the end of my presentation anyway. So let me just put my last slide up there. What I was basically saying, and I say it so much, is just the invitation for men to be part of the conversation, men to be part of what it really means to feel silenced and sidelined. And there's this quote out there that when women find voice, everybody finds voice. So despite the fact that my research was primarily focused on the female experience, those who've read the book, who've gone to my seminars or sat through conferences, have come up and said, the male experience may not be that different. And so again, the book is in the world because of Fielding and Fielding support. And I hope that it continues to invite a different conversation. And so I will pause here. The Willow Group is my private consulting and coaching firm that I continue to maintain on the side, even now that I am the full-time program director for evidence-based coaching. And so it was a pleasure to start with a dissertation and with the support of Dianne Kipnes, birth a book that's now in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Carrie.
you, Carrie. I'm
echoing.
echoing.
I'm not
Not
sure.
sure
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't hear an echo, but it might.
No, it's not.
Well, I don't.
I
you are a pioneer, and we appreciate being very much here award.
Charles, sounds a little lovely.
Okay. Are there questions, comments for?
I'm going to take my video off just in case my bandwidth does that again and I don't lose the conversation. So I'm here even though I'm taking off my video.
Great. Questions or comments for Carrie? Well, I have one question. How are you able to practice the concepts and the ideas that you have championed in terms of voice for women in the short time that you've been director of the evidence-based coaching program, or how do you imagine doing that in the future?
You know, that's a great question. And I think when it comes to voice is such a personal and intimate thing. And I think what's really important to me in one of the very first changes I made when I came on as the director is having a different way of connecting with brand new students. So their very first couple weeks as a student in the evidence-based coaching program looks different now. And why it looks different is we're talking about things in a different way. We're talking about distinctions. We're talking not just distinctions in coaching, but I'm getting them into a reflective practice on who, not just the what. Oftentimes when we're first learning something, we're very focused on the skills, the what. What are we doing? How are we doing it? And making sure there's an integration of who are they and who do they want to be, and staying in those conversations consistently. We lose that sometimes as we get deeper and deeper into our careers and just keep coming back to center. Mm-hmm. So it's a subtle thing, but it's something that I think has shifted my way of being in the world is how are people experiencing me? How is my voice feeling heard? And do I understand the dominant discourse of fielding so that I know when I need to pivot to be heard at fielding and pivot to be heard by the students, pivot to be heard by my clients in private practice, pivot to be heard by adjunct, understanding the different ways to use voice. Just being Carrie Arnold's authentic self is not always going to be successful. I have to shift based on audience. And those are some of the conversations we've begun to engage in at a deeper level.
Great. Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Mary, could you mute yourself? I think I'm going to move on. And I want to thank you again very much for both carrying out your project under Kipnes and exemplifying the purposes of that award on her behalf. Before we end, Hillary, are you there? And if so, I wonder if you could just say a word about where people can find out about the application for the Kipnes Award.
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Kate, Carrie, and Larry. It was wonderful to hear your research and spend a little bit more time with each one of you. And thank you everyone for being here today. A couple of things I'll share in chat with you right now is if you haven't already, I'd like to encourage you to join the Alumni Association. It's free. You also get access to the basic alumni library as an alum. And I put the link right there in chat. This is also the website for all things fielding alum. You get your news here. You can update your contact information. And if you happen to be multitasking right now and looking at the site, when you click on engage on the menu, it will take you to the news page. And what I'll do right now is I'm going to add that link to the announcement for the Kipnes Award. Let me grab that real quick. And I'm dropping this into the chat. You can go ahead and click right there. And if you know of someone who you think would be, great to apply for this, please feel free. If you know other alums that are doing some work out there. And that is all that I can think of right now. Charles, am I missing anything? Oh,
No, I think that's great. I will just add that this is a pretty competitive award. We get a lot of very high quality proposals. So far, we have only awarded one award each year. We may award 2 next year. We'll see what we get. And the final decisions are difficult because there's a number of them are just really outstanding. And I think you can see that from these 3 presentations and how exceptional they are. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, President Rogers, for your comments, and thank you, Dianne Kipnes, for your generosity and your support as a Fielding alum. It's greatly advantaging Fielding Graduate University. Thank you, everyone. Any final comments or questions from anyone? Well, again, thanks to our speakers and thanks to all those of you who attended. Bye-bye.
thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.